everyone. Welcome back to Flame Talk. I'm your host, Evie, and today I have a special guest, Keyen. We will be talking about a very great topic, which is talking about emotional intelligence. I'm going to let Keyen today tell you a little bit about his background and what is it that he does. Keyen, thank you for being here today. Can you let us know what is it that you do?
Yes, I can. Evie, thank you so much for having me.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. Happy to be here. I'm excited to be part of an awesome conversation facilitated by you. We're going to go in on some good emotional intelligence stuff. But like you said, a little background on me. I was a former professional athlete, had the opportunity to play in the NFL. I had a neck injury that prevented me from ever actually playing a game. So that shattered my dreams of since I was 10 years old. But nevertheless, I knew I had to pivot. I think a skill that I've always really had is not fully ever identifying with whatever I'm involved with. So as much as I was immersed in the football world and doing everything I could to play at the highest level, I also never fully identified with it. So I was able to pivot about 5 or 6 days after I was told I'd never be able to play again, which surprises a lot of people. But from there, I had a finance degree, so I was going to take the route of being a financial analyst, but said, not a chance I'm going to sit in an office.
Right.
So instead, I decided to embark down the path of continually leading people. And I wanted to be able to help inspire people to live their own heaven on earth. I read a book by a guy named Bruce Lipton. And he talks about being able to create your own heaven on earth through different forms of science that can be understood. So I'm like, I want to do this for myself and help other people. So that was about 7 years ago that I went down this journey of really doing that and living all over the world and really just helping facilitate change in people and helping them create their own heaven on earth while simultaneously living my own.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Since you did suffer the injury, how I'm sure that's detrimental. Like, this is your life, your passion. And how were you able to come up, get out of that? Because so many people, you're talking about football, that's someone's dream. How are you able to, like, how were you able to handle that?
Well, like I said, I never fully identify with whatever I decide to do. So I think the problem with a lot of people is that whatever they go all in on, they identify fully with that thing. So if that thing's not good or that thing ends, then literally part of them ends. Whereas I saw football as more of an accessory to me, where I did always pour into the relationships that I had around me. I poured into school. I poured into my own mental and emotional health during that time where I didn't burn all bridges in the process of making
That's great.
football happen. That I think is what allowed me to be able to pivot a little more effectively. Now, obviously, when I got the news, I cried my eyes out that
Of
night.
course.
I was in Kansas City in a hotel room by myself and just cried. But then after a few days, like I said, it was like, okay, well, this is the reality of the situation. And I'm also from the Midwest, so I think we already have kind of a, well, this is what it is, so let's move forward kind of mentality.
Right.
And very blue collar in that way. And so I think that probably helped a little bit too, having that background of the Midwest. But yeah, I think never fully identifying with, but being able to fully go after things is what allows me to not have to go through the death of my identity because I never allowed it to be who I am.
That's amazing. I really do commend you because you could have fallen into a depression, drugs, alcohol. So for you to have that, be so mentally tough and handle that, that's amazing. Really is amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and I speak, a lot of people would say, oh, that could have been your rock bottom, but I use the term called rock top. So like I reached a peak of something and I realized that it wasn't actually the thing that was going to bring me the fulfillment that I really wanted. So I, similar to a lot of other people that go down a path of really committing to what they want at the highest level, have an idea that when I get there, then I'll finally be able to feel the way that I want to feel.
Right.
And so I had that belief system going into getting to the NFL. And then before I was told I'd never be able to play again, I had a feeling of, holy shit, like this is it. Like this is what it feels like to
Right.
accomplish my lifelong dream. I thought it would feel like so much more. Now, obviously there was the initial excitement associated with getting it. But then when it sunk in that, okay, practice is tomorrow, let's go, I was back to the feeling that I had before. So I hit a rock top and like, oh my gosh, nothing I ever do will bring me the fulfillment that I want. So what will? And that's what brought me down the path of creating my own heaven on earth, separate from having to wait to feel a certain way.
Right.
But that was, I think, what I would call it a rock top in that experience.
Amazing story, guys. Amazing. Well, what Flame Talk is all about. I usually talk about relationships, things that people go through, friends. I have my Instagram where people send me different stories or problems, and they want to get like the whole. I want to get your opinion, so I post like a question, and then everybody chimes in. Again, even personally, my experiences. So since I decided let's talk about emotional intelligence, what's your definition of emotional intelligence?
Emotional intelligence is being able to get what you want without sabotaging it in the process. I think not knowing ourselves, not knowing our own triggers, not knowing our own deeper subconscious beliefs and emotional associations with certain things
Right.
is what gets in the way of us being able to get what we want. So if we can understand ourselves at a very, very deep emotional level, then we can't get in our own way, which then allows us to get whatever it is that we want. And so I think that's what causes most people to run into issues with getting what they want, whether that's a dream job, a dream life, a dream relationship, those different, deeper emotional triggers that aren't understood that are preventing them from getting that thing.
Interesting. I feel maybe from childhood, let's say maybe a person has childhood trauma and maybe anger. Like some people are so quick to like just snap. You understand that it's like you can tell them anything and it's like, that's it, they're going off. Do you think that has anything to do or with childhood? Like if a person has a trauma where they react with anger and they just don't think like, hold on, let me maybe count to 10, relax, and see if I can calm down, then we can talk, as opposed to just like snapping.
Absolutely, 100%. That's where it's a fun game to be able to find what exactly the thing was that happened to cause you to adapt to be like that. But I think before we even get to that, I think it's important to understand that a lot of our behavior actually isn't us. So if someone can come to terms with the fact that, well, maybe the way I've been acting and the way that I've been responding to the world around me isn't really me, and they can begin the process of being open to the fact that maybe it came from somewhere, because it's an adaptation. It's
Right.
simply an adaptation. So that was the most profound part for me, was just recognizing or coming to terms with the fact that it's like, hey, this way that I've been being for so long, or these ways of me being for so long, actually might not really be me. It might just be me responding to something that's no longer a threat in my life, which is pretty fascinating concept. And that's when I've got obsessed with it. I'm like, well, how else in my life am I not really living me?
Right.
And I've gone down that path, continually go down that path even more, which is a difficult process because it causes us to have to
Yes.
challenge who we've been, and our minds don't generally like to dabble in the instability associated with questioning ourselves. So it's not a natural process to question ourselves, because that creates a level of instability. But through the instability, ultimately, we get what we want.
I agree with that. I think personally, it is difficult. It is challenging. A lot of people just don't think they have a problem. They don't have that capacity where they can think and feel like, okay, let me just bring it down a niche and realize that I'm going overboard or I'm acting out of character. How or what would you recommend for someone to acknowledge that first? Because that's the first thing you need to do. You need to acknowledge, like, listen, I'm an explosive person. I can't be like this. Everybody just be like, hey, you're in a stoplight. I mean, in a light, and as you can see, the light has not even within a second they're honking the horn at you and they're, cursing you out. Like it's people are just reactive. So how can or what's your recommendation for someone to realize, like, listen, how do you get there? How do you start working on that on your emotional intelligence?
Well, they have to be incentivized to want to do it. So they've had to have enough happen to be like, hey, maybe I am the problem. So if someone hasn't hit that point, though, then they're naturally not going to be incentivized. But oftentimes, through just a little bit of reflection about looking at your own life and saying, hey, have I been getting what I want, or have I consistently been running into roadblocks and blaming other people for those roadblocks? So that'll give you a quicker ability to be able to understand where you haven't been getting what you want. But most of the time, because the majority of people are walking around incredibly unconscious of what they're doing and how responsible they are for everything that happens in their life, they're not going to look at themselves to want to change. But by taking time to reflect on your own life and say, hey, like, what I've been doing, is it working in getting me what I want? And if it hasn't, then maybe you should start to consider the idea that how you've been being needs to shift and change.
That's awesome. Do you think it has to do with a level of maybe maturity?
Oof, I don't even know. I guess if you want to say deep levels of knowing yourself as maturity, then sure. But the word maturity doesn't necessarily resonate with me in that regard. I think it's more just the act of self-reflection and being able to go deeper into understanding yourself. And if someone has taken the time to do that, I would say they are naturally someone that's probably more emotionally sturdy or emotionally regulated than someone that's not.
Right. And I love that you said that because I've been that person where I've acknowledged like growing up it's like you're usually like the strong one. You know, it's like you go through things and it makes you strong. And you're like a I was a firecracker and I'm a work in progress. But I've done way better. But I've realized you got to have those people around you where be like, well, that hold you accountable. They'll be like, maybe you messed up. Maybe you did this. Maybe you need to tone it down. So it's like you said, you need to acknowledge that. So like I said, I'm a work in progress.
But you know what's interesting is this, I think this is a really good dialogue that we're having because I come from the other side. So I'm much more apt to, like, ever since I was a young kid, ever since I can remember, I've always been very, very conscious of how other people might be feeling towards what I'm saying or doing to them. And so I've always been much more apt to be more reserved in my approach and be like, well, maybe what you're saying is right. I'm probably wrong. That's generally how I've thought. I still remember, like, I mean, even being as good of a football player as I was, I remember there was a story. I haven't told the story before on a podcast, but I was like maybe 10, 11 years old, and there were some kids hanging out. But there was a creek that was in the middle of houses on both sides of the creek, and we as kids would come and play from the houses on both sides in this creek area. And there's a trampoline at my neighbor's house, and my little brother and I, who was probably like half my size, were playing with the neighbor kids on the trampoline. And one of the kids wasn't a very big kid, but he was very boisterous and bossing people
Right.
around. I was much bigger than him, but he was just very certain and confident in that. And he said, hey, you have to get off the trampoline. And I found out that he was jealous of me later on. And I was like, well, me? Like, well, why would he say that? Why would he
Right.
say that I need to get off this trampoline? What did I do to invoke that in him to make him want to kick me off the trampoline? Right? Obviously, the way that I was.
Right.
And I was like, okay, all right, fine. And I got off, and I was a little sad. And my little brother goes up. He's like, hey, you can't say that to my big brother. And just stood up for me.
Right,
So
right.
so that gives people a little context of like my background. I was always a very like sensitive kid in that way. But I think this is good because we're going to be able to both talk from opposite perspectives where I've through my life have had to embody more of what you naturally already have, which I'm sure for you to continue to evolve and advance in your life, you'll have to embody more of what I maybe naturally have.
That's awesome. Kudos to your brother. Yes, going back to my childhood, I had like, I'm not saying it was extremely horrible, but sometimes you go through situations that make you tough, make you strong. You're like the one in the family that is like, okay, you're doing everything. So you have no choice but to be strong.
Is maybe explosive.
Relationships in your professional world and in your relationship, you don't want to be that person where you're just like, you're trying to communicate with your partner and you just any little thing that they tell you you're just gonna snap. That's not healthy. It's at all. So it helps you within everything, your relationships with your person and in professional.
Okay, so you
So
think it'll lead you to being more connected and having deeper levels of intimacy with the person you're intimately involved with? You think that's what it'll help
I
you?
definitely,
Okay.
because if there's someone that's telling you, like for example, I don't know, they might be critiquing something or giving you their opinion on something. It's not for you to take it the wrong way. We need that. We need the correction. we need to acknowledge, hey, maybe you need to tone it down, maybe this or maybe that. And that helps you just, your relationships with anyone just go more smoother as opposed to just, being so reactive. You understand?
Okay,
So
but how do you do that? So how have you been able to like stop yourself and not be as reactive? Because it's an emotional response, right? So
it is.
it's hard to be conscious in that moment and to do something different than what you've always done. So what have you done to be able to begin that process of changing the way that you show up in that moment that is pretty impulsive because you don't really have time to think. It just kind of happens. So
Correct.
how have you done that?
It's hard, I have to admit. And I've had friends before tell me, like, oh, you're the snappy one. So first of all, you need people to hold you accountable. The other thing is you need to acknowledge that yourself. And then it's like, okay, when somebody's probably telling you something that's triggering you, in that moment, I tell myself, Evie, don't say anything, be quiet. Sometimes you even count. You're like, okay, let me just count.
Yes.
And you start counting until 10 until you're able to like bring it down. And
Great.
then
So
you're
so
just
that's what you do. You sit in that moment, you're aware that your heart rate's elevating and you're starting to get worked up, and then you stop and you count to 10. That's
I
what
count to 10 in my mind, and then I just be quiet. I look away, and I'm just like, Evie, don't say anything. Just listen. And it's like, okay, by that time already, you're already like, let the person talk, say what they have to say, and then you can respond.
Yes, it was. I have a client of mine who just like you can imagine, this like big, badass, masculine dude, great shape, crushes it in business. Like his hair's all slicked to the side. Like you see this guy, you're like, all right, this guy doesn't fuck around.
Right.
And so he had that issue where he's running into a lot of issues in his intimate relationship with his fiance, and also in his business to some extent was causing some problems. And what we did was he came to the awareness in that moment that his heart rate was elevated and he was definitely out of control. And what I had him do was he go this big like strong
Right.
guy. I had him say, "I love pink ponies." And he one time he almost got out of his car and fought somebody. And he got on our next call. He was so excited. He's like, "Dude, you won't believe it. I was sitting there pissed off in traffic. This guy cut me off, and this guy stopped. And it was my perfect opportunity to whoop his ass." And he's like, "Then I just said, I love pink ponies, and I thought about you."
That
And
is
and he
hilarious.
said that 3 times in his head. He's like, "I love pink ponies. I love pink ponies. I love pink ponies." And he's like, "Dude, it worked." And I'm like, "Great."
You know what? That's a new one. I'm going to try that
Yeah,
one. I'm
for
gonna
sure.
try
So
that.
something
That
that
is
just like
hilarious.
is a pattern interrupt that's so like weird and uncomfortable that you can't help but kick yourself out of that emotional
Right.
state that you're in.
No, but that's funny because when you think about it, it's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's not like now you're counting 1 to 10. You're thinking about something that can change your entire, like, your attitude.
Yeah. And you're like
So that's
almost pissed
cool.
off doing it too. You're like, "Oh, I don't want to fucking say this. I love pink ponies. I love pink.
That
I love
is
pink ponies."
hilarious.
Yeah,
Hilarious.
definitely. But then you got someone like me, which is much more apt to not respond in that way. I'm very aware in that moment of how I'm feeling, so I stop myself before I would allow myself to express it.
Right.
So I know there's a lot of people out there like that, and if that's the case with you, then naturally this is what I've practiced is when I notice the first reaction that comes up, it's an act of bravery and being courageous of allowing myself just to express it in whatever way it comes up.
Right.
So it might be perceived in a way that is wrong or bad or that was explosive or not correct, but practicing allowing myself just to speak from the place of it naturally occurring is what's allowed me to find more confidence in that voice that I have and being able to then consistently show up in a way where maybe I'm not being as explosive
Right.
as time goes on, but I'm able to adequately get my point across without feeling like I have to be overly catering to that other person and what they're feeling. So it's funny how there's just the opposites where you're like, "Stop, hold on, let me try to rephrase that. Okay, this." But for me, it's like, "Oh shit, this is it. I have to say it."
Right. Right.
Okay, but isn't that wild to think? There's like, that's
It
literally
is.
how I operate. I'll notice a response come up and it won't be to come out. It'll just be like, "Okay, well, what will happen if I do that?" That's my natural way of operating.
That's
Which
awesome, though.
it is, but it isn't, because then it can create some confusion because then I don't allow myself to authentically just express and share from that place of what's really happening. And so then it can be confusing if I'm constantly telling myself, because what I'm doing subconsciously is I'm telling myself that how I feel doesn't matter. And so psychologically, That's not very good. It
Right.
lowers the confidence of that person. If you could just imagine, like if you're constantly saying to yourself, you don't matter, by constantly pushing down whatever's really there, that's naturally going to be detrimental.
That's
So
true.
so there's something healthy about your way of naturally operating, in that it's healthy for the self, the ego of the self. Your ego is a little too big, but it's healthy because it's saying to the self that the self matters. You see what I'm saying?
But the other thing that you just mentioned
Yeah.
is that sometimes you can just be telling yourself, you know what, okay, or just end the conversation, be like, you're right. You're right. Is that really healthy? You really think about it and it's like, I don't know, because I didn't have that opportunity to voice my opinion or tell you anything. I'm just telling you, okay, you're right. Simply because I don't want to create an argument. So, and then you walk away and be like, okay, you're right. I'm just gonna let you think that you're right. But then you stay with that within you.
Yes. Exactly. Then where's it go? It gets stuck inside.
That's it.
Absolutely, which happens with a lot of people. I had a call with a client today who's crushes it in business, but with his business partner in particular, he has that type of dynamic where he doesn't want to create too many problems because the guy's very valuable, and so he's not willing to really speak up and share what's really coming up inside of him, and then he just succumbs to whatever that guy wants and doesn't end up being able to adequately put his point across in the way that it needs to, because oftentimes it is what's best, not what the other guy thinks is best. And then he ends up feeling not so good about himself consistently over time, which then trickles into every other area of life. So
Absolutely.
if you can look at it outside of just the moment of, hey, you have to be able to express yourself in a way that's productive and healthy to the conversation. If you want to feel good about yourself, to feel confident, then you have no choice but to really do it. But I think a lot of people that are afraid to speak up and say things in those moments, really stand by what it is that they believe is true, they establish not so healthy relationship with themselves, or I should say perpetuate an already unhealthy relationship because of fears of what might happen if conflict arises. So that's a whole other topic of conversation,
Right.
which is people that are generally afraid of conflict and what might happen if
This
conflict
is
does.
why communication is key. And I think delivery, the way you talk about things, if you see somebody, you know someone is explosive or someone is the way they are, I think the other person, with the way you talk, the way you say things, can kind of like, bring that down. And sometimes when two people are just arguing and going at it, it doesn't help out the situation. The other thing is when you don't get to voice or talk about things, that's why people hold on and they explode. Because there comes a time, a
Yes.
day, where it's like, you know what, that's it. I can't take this anymore. And there you go. You let everything out. So now what?
Then something happens that you don't really want to happen.
Exactly. Simply because of that. So I think communication is key. How you say things, ladies, gentlemen. I mean, there's different ways that you can talk to a person. If you know your person, you know your person is explosive or they lack in an area, like try to bring that person down, and like that, both of you at the end can talk. That's what I think can help, as opposed to just you're having two people just going at it. And it's a topic that a lot of us, it's important because a lot of us lack that emotional intelligence, be it in your professional world and in your relationship. That's why there's so many people, and like I said, you've heard of the passport bros. They're saying that us Western women, oh, you have attitudes, and they go elsewhere, to try to get into relationships because women overseas are different than the women here, within the States, Western women. So that's something we need to work on. Definitely key.
Yeah, but this is a good conversation. My take on it is that because women in the Western world are exposed to so much, that their standards for what they expect has substantially gone up, and we're living in a world where the majority of men can't reach or meet a lot of those standards. So men that are very well-rounded, men that do have incredible health, make good money, are very emotionally connected, are very driven, going after their purpose and what they want,
Right.
they're naturally capitalizing on the standards that have raised by the majority of women, but most of other dudes that can't keep up with the raising of the standards of women naturally to go to other places where the standard isn't as high. And so I look at it a little differently in that way. Now, I'm not saying it's correct because a lot of women have unrealistic standards for themselves.
Yes.
AKA they're not shit, but they think they're shit, right? They think their shit doesn't stink, but actually
Right.
like they don't really provide that much value
Right.
as far as what a man really wants from a woman in regard to value. But really the issue at hand is that the standards of women are raising across the board because of the level of lifestyle and exposure to a lot of obviously attention from men that's increased the size of women's egos and standards. So guys can either do one of two things. They can either go somewhere else and find somebody, or they can raise their own standard for themselves and how they're living. But that's a lot more difficult to do. And it's easy for me, I think, to say that, well, the obvious choice is to raise your own standard as a man to be able to keep up with the changing world. But that's also because, like in apple tree apples, that's just kind of how I've always been. I've always been someone that's shot for becoming the absolute best version of myself possible without anybody else ever having to really tell me to do so. Ever since I can remember, like I was doing push-ups
awesome.
by myself in third grade without my parents having to say something. It was just something that I was aware of that I needed to do. So for someone that isn't naturally like that, I can see how the changing world in the West would not be very enticing to stick around with. If you're not naturally driven to want to become an even greater version, then I would say, hey, go elsewhere and find a woman in those places that does also not have as high of a standard, which is great. And they can have an awesome relationship.
That's interesting. What would you recommend for women? Like, what's an advice that you would recommend for women? Since a lot of women, yes, you are correct. The standards are super high for women. And that's the problem nowadays. I've talked about this before. If a woman is making over, 6 figures, granted, she's not going to date someone who's probably not making equal or more money. Or less money than her, due to the standards. What's your take, like your input on that, women,
Well, I just
or an
think,
advice I would say that you would give women?
yeah, it's very easy to have an inflated ego in today's world, especially of any type of social media presence as a
Yes.
woman. So being able to take a second to acknowledge that, hey, maybe your ego is a little inflated too high, I think is the first step. Maybe girls hearing me say that won't like that, but I think it's very healthy to do, to always check our egos and really, really see like, hey, is my confidence coming from a place of actual evidence in my life to support that confidence, or is it because I'm just getting a lot of attention? And if you're getting a lot of attention and your ego is high, then you probably won't actually get what you want, because a lot of the dudes that are giving you the attention just want to fuck you
Of
anyway,
course.
right?
Of course.
So that's the tough part, is just because a dude wants to fuck you doesn't mean that he wants a relationship with you, which is probably what you're actually looking for.
Right. Ladies, you heard that straight from his mouth. I do agree with that. And I think in my previous episode, I did talk about, and I think, of course, I already talked about this, social media. How that has just, forget it. I think we're just doomed with social media because of that same thing. Everyone's ego, everyone's, the attention. People live for likes, for the follows.
Yeah, but I think social media is amazing, honestly.
Oh, but
Yeah.
again, I touched upon that
Well,
because
you're either getting played by it or you're playing it. Like you're either getting played by the game and you're lost in the game, or you're above the game playing it to get what you want. And so that's why I personally love social media, because I think I know how to leverage it in a
Okay.
way that gets me more of what I want. But yeah, if you have your own internal insecurities where you need the likes and the comments to feel good about you, then naturally you're going to get lost in the game.
absolutely.
So that's where we talk about full circle, emotional intelligence, understanding yourself. It's like, well, why do you feel like you need to get that validation from social media? And that's where you can go deeper into yourself and understanding where you might be lacking, and be able to fill that space within yourself with something outside of social media to be able to actually one day have an adequately healthy relationship with it, where you're not consumed by it and dependent on it, but instead using it to play the game.
There you go. I love this conversation because it is so true. There's so many women, and I'm gonna hold you girls accountable. There's a lot of women that's just now what they look forward to. You understand? It's the likes, it's how many follows, and that's it. That's all they care for. And I think that stems down to something personally, yourself. It's important that you love yourself, you know yourself, because that's something that I think is a big problem nowadays.
Yeah.
Big time, big time. Is social media. But again, like you said, it's good and bad, and that's what I said in my last episode. You can use it, if you own a business, you can use it for business, and it's also for fun as well. But you
Yeah,
definitely
dating.
need to.
It's great for dating too.
Oh yeah, nowadays it's just like it's easy. Like you just slide into someone's DM, and it's like, oh okay. So, and it's not just now. You have so many different apps. You'd be surprised. TikTok, the Facebook, and all that stuff. But yeah, it always, again, you have to look at yourself, check yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with you looking yourself in the mirror, asking yourself, okay, what is wrong with me? Why you may have everything and you still feel empty. That has to do with yourself. And I think that's a conversation that a reality, a conversation that people need to you know, have with yourself. I always say there's nothing wrong with therapy. If you need therapy, listen, I'm all for it. You understand? Like, do what's going to help you. So, what's your opinion on therapy?
Well, I guess it depends on the person and type of person. I have different opinions for men and women. I think there is a message, a mainstream narrative that men should be getting therapy and should be more emotional and should be more expressive in their emotions. But I don't fully agree in regard to men being more emotionally expressive. I think men need to get better at understanding their emotions so they can articulate what's actually happening instead of being lost in the emotion of the expression. Because a lot of guys will either be explosive or they'll shut down and not say anything, right? So I don't believe men should become more emotional. I think men should do therapy from the standpoint of understanding themselves at a deeper level so
Okay.
they can navigate their own emotions more effectively and thus be more successful in their relationships, be more successful in their business and personal life outside of just their intimate relationships. But ultimately, it's not so they can become more emotional, contrary to what women say they want, which they don't actually want. Women are women are designed to make a man become someone that she doesn't want to date. That's what they're generally programmed to do. Women don't know they're doing this, but they're actually supposed to do that to constantly make sure their man is evolving and becoming better. A woman is the best at finding a man's weaknesses, and it can either make a man or break a man when a
Facts.
woman does do that. But men have
That's
to
true.
understand that that's what women are inherently meant to do. They're there to try to poke holes or find the holes in our foundations that are already there. So if we can do that, then we can make things a little less personal in the
Right.
emotional expression towards them. But getting back to what we were talking about with the therapy for men, it can't just stop at being emotionally expressive. And I think a lot of dudes will get therapy and they'll do things like psychedelics and they'll really expose deeper levels of their heart and emotions and who they are. But it's very important to then get that space that was released filled back up by strong masculine guidance. And I think most guys are on one end of the spectrum or the other, where they're either getting a bunch of mentors and they're constantly getting people that are going to pour into them, telling them what to do, but never actually do the underlying deeper emotional work to naturally embody some of those things that the
Okay.
mentors are telling them to do. Or they'll be very emotionally expressive and be getting therapy, but never actually receive strong masculine guidance in the way they need to. So one without the other, I don't think is beneficial. I think as a man, you need both. You need to be able to release emotionally and express yourself to, I would say, another man, and then be able to have the guidance to be able to then know how to facilitate what to do next
Right.
as a result. So it's important to have both mentors, but also emotionally expressive spaces that you can release emotionally with to understand ourselves better in that way.
That's great. I've never looked at it that way. Um, Usually men are not open to therapy. It's like
Which is
therapy.
it's
I don't need
stupid.
therapy.
It's foolish. It's absolutely foolish. It doesn't make any sense. Like, our own deeper rooted, subconscious, unresolved emotional wounds are the things that are preventing us from getting what we want. Why would you not resolve that? It doesn't like you're an idiot. Guys that say that are stupid. I look at it and be like, you're a fucking idiot, dude. Like, you just don't understand how things work if you're really sitting here telling me that. So it's just maybe a lack of knowledge in the way of understanding. But that's where it's important for guys like me that I would say come from more of the gladiator masculine background, where I'm not just like a long-haired hippie telling guys to be emotional.
Of course.
To be able to deliver this message, because it's much more better received, which is like the type of dudes that I work with are men that are more naturally like masculine in their presence and how they show up. And so I'm able to help them understand the importance of this other dimension of things, and quickly they understand how important it is through working with me.
That's great because again, there's so many men. I hear this all the time, and the first thing is, I don't need therapy. There you go. You guys heard it. Keyen, let us know what exactly is it that the ways you can help men like that if someone wants to, reach out to you, talk to you, and work with you.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing that any man could do is commit to his heart-aligned, God-given path. And most of the process of our time here on earth is removing any of the things that are telling us to do anything other than being on that path. And so having lower levels of emotional intelligence, which means you're not aware of the things that we talked about at the beginning of how the way you are is not because it's who you really are, but because of different environmental upbringing adaptations that you have, then men can begin to commit to the process of being on their path. So I help men release all that is not them so they're able to fully pursue and go after what they want at the highest level, which will give them the fulfillment and also the success at the same time that they want in their life, in their business, and in their relationships. So I like the merging of the East and the West, the success of the West, but also the internal peace of the East.
That's awesome. Now, do you work with women?
At this time, I'm taking exceptions,
Okay.
but as a general rule, no.
Is there a reason why?
Seasonal inspiration. So I just go based off what I'm inspired to do and who I'm inspired to work with. I've spent previous seasons of life where I've only worked with women, and I've spent seasons where I've worked roughly equally with men and women. But this season in particular of life, I'm primarily just inspired to work with men. So I'm open to that changing, but in this place right now that I'm in, that's who I'm inspired to work with, and I honor that.
Do you think it's easier to work with men than women?
I think for me, I think both are easy.
Really?
Yeah, just based off like the time and experience that I have, I would say if I'm gonna say one's easier, I would say women.
Really?
Yeah, women. I think women naturally, when they decide to do something, they can trust a little more effectively. They're more like open and collaborative, whereas men take a little longer to break
can
down
see
the
that.
walls.
I can see that.
Or maybe that's just my own ability to navigate men and women. But yeah, guys tend to be a little more like,
Yeah.
like, oh, I don't want to go there. I'm not going to go there. Women are like, oh, I'll go there. Okay. Like,
That's
I
true.
guess.
I
And
agree.
I'm not going to say there's not any resistance with the women that I work with,
Right.
because a lot of the women that I've worked with in the past have been women that have been very guarded and haven't trusted men. So I have to break through that barrier associated with their association with not being able to trust men. But in general, I'd say women have a easier time being able to open up than men. Men normally take a little bit more.
You know what? That does make sense. I think that's why there are men that be so resistant to like, hey, I don't need
They
it.
definitely
so I
don't,
can
and
see
they
it.
definitely don't want their woman saying it either. That's for sure, right? Because why? Because a man wants to feel like he's providing for his woman in the way where he can
Right.
provide the safety. And so when she's saying that to him, it's basically saying, "Hey, you're not providing that safety." And so his own ego of the pride that he has and being able to provide for her gets threatened and questioned. But that's why it's so important for men to have close men with them in their lives, doing life with them, so we can check each other. So your woman doesn't have to check you, because nobody wants that.
No, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Do men hold other men accountable? Like, do you guys have that conversation and be like, dude, man, like, you're messing up? Like, because I think the same way is important for women. We women, we need that. We need great friends around us, friends that are going to hold us accountable. If you did something wrong, you need someone to check you. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, hey, I think you're wrong. I think you did this. I think you can better at that. There's nothing wrong with that. You can't always have the women telling you, yes, girl, F him, or this, or whatever the case may be. Like, no, the circle around you is important. And I wonder, are men like that?
Yeah, whereas I think, like you just said, was a great example with women. Women generally won't always give the best taking accountability advice, but more so giving advice from the place that woman is in that's giving the advice. If she's single, she's probably going to give advice that's going to be catered towards the single. Or if she's in a relationship, she's probably going to give that advice towards that. Or not really holding her friend accountable. But guys, they're just not going to talk about it. Guys generally just like won't go there. And I think that's a problem. More men need to be willing to go there. So if you surround yourself with guys that are willing to say, hey, dude, like, how are you? Like women do. Women
Right.
do this shit all the time. It's like, hey, how's it going? How are you feeling? Oh, what's going on today? Which is great. It's good to do that.
Right.
It's good to be able to talk about those things. But guys are generally uncomfortable with that, which is what prevents guys in general from being able to advance and proceed in their lives in the way that they want to and get the success that they want. So for your own sake of being able to find more success, be that guy for your friend that says, hey, dude, like, how are you? Like, how really are you doing? Not just, oh, bro, I'm good. But just like, hey, how are you really doing?
Right.
What's going on? Like, what's going on in your life? What are you working towards? What are you trying to make happen? How's stuff at work going? Like, do you need support in any way? Like, what's going on? And being willing to have those conversations. And I have a lot of, surrounding everywhere for me, I have in my life, just because I've created that for myself and in my existence. But yeah, guys need to take more responsibility in being able to do that for themselves, because it's only going to benefit you.
That's right. Listen, this is an amazing conversation that we've had. Gentlemen and ladies, please listen to what we just said. Everything is for your own benefit. It's something that's going to benefit you in your relationship, be it with your partner, professional wise. And yeah, this was great. Is there anything you would like to say to end?
Yeah, you don't have to listen to anything that we said. That's fine. But
Hey, it's for your own
hey,
good.
it's nothing off my back if you don't. Honestly, and
It's
that's
for you.
Really, and that's what I always say too. Is like, I don't have to be here talking. Like, I know all this stuff, and I'm sitting here benefiting from knowing all this information.
Exactly.
Right. So take it or don't. I'm benefiting from being able just to speak out these things because it helps me be able to integrate deeper levels of it within myself. But if you want to do it, if you don't, that's also fine too. But
There you go.
I would advise you, as in the big theme of this talk today, to be able to take some time to really reflect on your life to see if what you're doing is working and getting you what you want, or is it not?
There you
And
go.
if it is getting you what you want, then fuck everything that we said and keep
True.
doing what you're doing, and that's great. But if not, maybe listen.
Keyen, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking your time to be here. It was a great conversation. If you guys enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit like, make sure you share, and subscribe. Peace.